So let's actually go in and see what this looks like. Step one is create my webinar. So I would go into, I'm here logged in to GoToWebinar, and I would say I need to schedule a webinar. And I'll just choose one of the existing ones. The only important thing when you're scheduling these webinars is that you don't require more information than you have in Infusionsoft. So I'll just leave all this default, September 22nd, all this is fine. I'm going to go ahead and save and continue. Over here I don't care about a logo or any of this. Of course you can do this on your own side, but this is the important step, is the registration, because if I had checked all and I was requiring all of these fields, it's not going to work. You need to clear all, or just by default it should hopefully just be looking for first name, last name, and email address. Because Infusionsoft is the primary place that you're capturing data, you don't really need to worry what gets passed to GoToWebinar. The only reason it even needs these is so that it can send the person those webinar reminders. So I'll come down here and I will save this meeting. As soon as my meeting is saved, what I wanted from this meeting, now that it's in here, is I want the ID. So if I click on edit or whatever and then I look up in the URL, let me bring this down. So I clicked on edit of this webinar here. And when I do that, the URL has in it the webinar key. So this is the piece that I really needed, is the webinar key. And what I would do is I would take this and I would copy it, and then I would go into my MoldingSoft gateway here, and under GoToWebinar I went to Your Webinars, and I'm going to click Add Webinar. Right here is Add Webinar. Now when this comes up, I'm pasting the webinar key that I got from GoToWebinar here, and then I need to make sure that my webinar date is the actual date of the webinar, which was the 22nd, I believe, in that case. And then also I want to match the time zone, because that's how it's going to register me. So Mountain Daylight was my time zone. From this big old drop down here, I can go find Mountain Time right there. This is another required setting that's important, and that is webinar server. When you're actually logged in to GoToMeeting, you may have noticed this, but you are either a www1 or 2. Maybe there will be more in the future, but for now there's those two, and you need to take note of that because what you choose here is important. So I'm going to say I'm number 1, and then this setting here, the assign infusion tags and run action sets, this is for you to tag people back. And what that means is if this gateway receives a customer, or you post someone here saying add this person to a webinar, and they happen to get added to this particular webinar, you have the option to send tags back to Infusionsoft or action sets back to Infusionsoft when this occurs, so that you can confirm that. Now understand that you don't need to do this, because in a typical situation you're letting the person sign up from Infusionsoft, which means you can tag them however you want to on your form actions, for example, your web form actions. It can add all the tags it needs to and then put them into this webinar. So let's finish this up. I added a webinar. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, so here's my webinar. It's saved. It's in my list here, and you can see it starts on September 22nd. The simplest way to get someone into a webinar is I'm going to copy this link above here. So I've got this HTTP post URL above my list of webinars, and this same URL can be found on the instructions page. But the idea here is you're sending a post to the gateway, and this is your ID to the gateway. And what it means is if I send this link to the gateway, and I'll show you how to send it to the gateway in just one second, but if I send that in, it's going to say, okay, there's no track involved, so I'm going to pick the webinar with no track that has not happened yet and is the next in line. So if I had another one scheduled in October 22nd, for example, and today was September 7th, it is still going to put them into this one all the way up until the 22nd, and then starting on the 23rd, it's going to stop and start putting them into the next webinar for October. So that's how it picks it, and that's also the relevance of these tracks, because if I had, for example, 2 different businesses and they both had webinars in September and October, I could just give them different tracks, but just understand that there's another video specifically for tracks, so go check it out. This one still is going to be the most basic use. So let's say I copy this link without the tracks, and then I go into Infusionsoft. And I'm going to just pick one of these people. Let's say this MB test record, MB test 101. And what I can do is I can apply this action to this person. I don't know if you've ever noticed in your action sets, but there is something called send an HTTP post. So From an individual customer record here, I can also apply actions just as I could from a web form success or an order form success or whatever. But the action I'm going to choose off this list is called send an HTTP post to another server. So I'll put in my post and I'll hit save. And I'll go ahead and apply that action to this user. Once I've applied the action, if I were to come over here to my GoToWebinar and refresh, this is the Moldingsoft gateway that I'm refreshing in, I'm going to see that this person was added to this webinar. You can see now it's refreshed. Registered is 1, so I've got 1 member in the webinar. And if I look on the GoToMeeting side, you can see registrant 0. If I refresh this screen as well, I'm going to see 1 registrant in here. And if I actually click that and look at the registrant, it is this MB Test 101 person. So that's how to send anybody in, is through an HTTP post. So what I could suggest for you is if you go to Setup and you go to Action Sets, probably just go ahead and make this post its own separate action set, and then you can use it universally throughout your system without having to go and figure out what the post format was or whatever. You can just use that thing each time. Okay, so here are my action sets. If I click on Add Action Set, it's going to give me a new window, and I'm going to say GTW, which is GoToWebinar or Gateway, post no track, for example. You can call it whatever you want, but the idea here, let me shrink my window down. The idea here is the action would be to send this post, and since this post never changes, it just basically posts to the gateway and then the webinar is actually picked based on dates, you can use this same action set over and over again. So again, right now what I'm doing is I'm creating an action set within Infusionsoft. The only action I put on there was to send the HTTP post, and then I pasted the link from the Moldingsoft gateway, the link example that we give you in there, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now that I have this action saved, I can go make a lot of different things and just reuse it. So let me give you a few of those examples. First of all, I could make an email template. So let's say somebody is in my system. In fact, let's say a group of people is already in my system and I just want them in the webinar. Let's search that way first. So if I go to find people, here's a group of my test people. And let's say I just wanted to take this person here, these 2 permatest records, and I wanted to put them in the webinar. But your list might be 100 people or 1,000 people or whatever. It might be all your gold members. However you look those people up, whoever has the box checked, I can now come over here and say, okay, I want to apply an action set. It's going to come up and I'm going to say, I'm going to copy from an existing action set, and this is why I said you should make it separate like this, because then you can always just go find it. And the one I did was GTW post no track. So without having to remember what that is, because I saved it one time as its own separate action, I can now just grab random people and add them to a webinar from a search like that, and we'll wait for this to process and then check them out. Okay, so I believe it is done. So again, if I come over here to GoToWebinar and refresh this screen, I'm going to see these 2 permatest people made it all the way to GoToWebinar. They're already in there because I made that action set run. Now that was from a lookup. You know that you can also run action sets from an email. So let me make a sample email and show you what that would look like. So I'd select my template type as email. This is going to come up. I'm going to give it whatever name, subject line, all this stuff. Here, I would say click below to RSVP for our webinar, or you could say register or whatever. But the idea is, in your email, you're going to click here on Open Merge Window and create a trackable link for this thing. So if I bring this over and I go to Links, and then over here I say Create Link, all of these windows are way too big for this recording area, so I apologize, I'm bouncing around here. Let's call this Test Webinar Registration. And it doesn't matter, what web page they go to, which is nice because you can actually have them click the webinar registration link and go off and do some other activity. The resulting page could say, thanks, you're already registered, now go watch this sales video or whatever. But with your link here, whatever you do to it, wherever you send them, after you have saved this link, it then has the ability to add actions. And so you would click here on actions, and again you'd say, oh, this is my webinar registration link. I'm going to go ahead and copy the action from an existing set, The existing set I have is called GTW post no track. I will copy that action. I will save this. And now this email, anybody it goes to, is going to end up in that webinar. So let me save this. Probably should do save and insert. There we go. So now this link ended up in my email. I'll call this test. And if I come down here and I save and send a test to myself here, and then I go look this test up in Gmail, here it is. So here's this link. I am not yet in the webinar, so let me show you this. If I come over here and refresh, my record is not in this webinar. There's only 3 registrants still, same 3 as before. The moment I click this link, so me as the user is what I'm saying, or your customer were to click that link, they are now automatically in this webinar. If I can find my refresh key, there it is. So you can see Micah Mitchell was added to this webinar for having clicked that link. And there are a couple other ways. I think the most used way is going to be from a web form. So you'd have a web form, and in fact I probably already have one of these, so let me just go look. Okay, we'll make one real quick. So I'd say test webinar registration. You can see I've been doing this in other systems. Not fake webinar, real webinar. Create that form, and everything else, this is the same thing. Everything else you do on this form is whatever you feel like that you would normally do within Infusion, meaning you can put them in a follow-up sequence, send them an email, tag them, do whatever you would normally do, send them to whatever thank you page you want. But at the end of the day, there's 2 important things when capturing new records. It is that you need their first name, last name, and email address, because that is exactly the fields that GoToWebinar themselves require you to submit. There's no way around it. And then, of course, you need the action, which once again you can copy from your saved action set. And this is the action to post them into the track. So if I copy this action and I save this form, let's go ahead and give this form a quick test. Maybe test 312, let's say. And I'll submit that. You are going to see that once again we have another member in our webinar here. So refresh that. There's now 5 registrants in the webinar. So you can see this is pretty easy. And of course the same thing would apply to an order form. If they were, let's say they were just buying one webinar, the order form success action could do the exact same thing. All it would need to do is make this post. So go ahead and copy it from your actions. Or this whole time I keep copying it, just remember that this post URL is listed right in the gateway for you.